From Abuja.
It's all about the human struggle to raise a level of living. That's what it's all about. I'm Magnus Packle, and this is Magnus Packle GVA. I appreciate you being a part of our show. In view today, our conclusion of the discussion on debt management in Nigeria. How capital market development and debt sustainability are critical for economic growth and development. But before that, let's take a quick view on how the BlackBerry phone, losing ground worldwide, has serious traction in Africa. Coming up. The BlackBerry phone is lost in America, but now found in Africa. In 2002, RIM released the first BlackBerry devices with integrated phone functionality. Now, worldwide, RIM sold only about 8 million units of its BlackBerry phones in the second quarter of 2012, compared to nearly 15 million units in the fourth quarter of 2010. Indeed, in 2009, RIM had nearly 20% of worldwide sales of smartphones. Today, that has declined to just about 5.2%. During this time, the iPhone has increased its worldwide market share of smartphones from 14.4% to 18.8%. Android-based platforms have seen their market share worldwide rise from a mere 3.9% to a whopping 64.1% during this same period. In the United States, about 50% of mobile subscribers own smartphones. In the second quarter of 2012, about 33% of these smartphone users use an iPhone, and this is from about 23% in the second quarter of 2011. Meanwhile, the BlackBerry share in the United States has dropped to about 7% from 11% last year and around 50% just 3 years ago. Now consider that Android systems accounted for about 56% of the smartphone market in the second quarter of 2012. With forecasts suggesting that the BlackBerry phone will drop close to 1% of the smartphone market in North America by the end of the year, where is the hope for BlackBerry and RIM? In Nigeria, BlackBerry is the #1 smartphone brand with a half of the market already using the RIM-made devices. With inexpensive and seemingly unlimited internet plans, over 95% of BlackBerry users in Nigeria use BBM, the BlackBerry Messenger. BlackBerry has been voted as the most popular phone among teenagers in Nigeria. Indeed, a series of Nollywood films released last year called BlackBerry Babes focus on how your social status can be harmed if you don't own a BlackBerry. There are more than 620 million active mobile lines in Africa, according to the GSM Association, second only to Asia. Nigeria, the continent's most populous nation, with about 168 million people and an increasingly important destination for multinational companies, accounts for nearly 100 million active phone users, with 5 million of these people already using smartphones. As I indicated earlier, about 50% of this 5 million use BlackBerry smartphones. The future for smartphones in Nigeria is huge. Sales in other African countries have also been very strong, especially in South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, and Tanzania. However, RIM has said that the high market share in Nigeria appears to be unique and compelling. RIM may do well to start thinking about producing BlackBerries in Africa to find and secure its future. Still in view, our conclusion of my discussion with Dr. Abraham Wankwo, on debt management in Nigeria. But up next in our hidden economics, the costly economics of bad driving. Some parents may be doing things that can maim or kill their own kids in the future. Bad driving is hereditary, according to a study that found that children of dangerous drivers had more accidents and more speeding fines than those of safe drivers. Researchers at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety in Virginia, in the United States of America, said that children whose parents had been in at least 3 crashes in the previous 5 years are 22% more likely to be in a crash themselves. The study found that a childhood spent in the backseat of a recklessly driven car is likely to instill very bad driving habits. If parents consistently ignore traffic rules and engage in speeding or driving through a red light, then their children are several times more likely to break traffic laws. Children learn from the behavior of their parents. Therefore, setting a bad driving example to young passengers could instill lifelong bad habits that can kill. If you never wear a seatbelt, it is seen as acceptable by your child, even if you insist they wear one as they are growing up. If children grow up watching their mom or dad talk, text, and email on their mobile phones while driving, they are going to think it's okay to do the same thing themselves. Reckless driving or using abusive language towards other drivers and getting too close to the car in front are all bad habits children can pick up from parents or other family members at an early age, and which, as I already said, can stay with them for life. Many bad habits seen among drivers in Africa often have to do with inexperience, laziness, and a lack of law enforcement of even the simplest type. So folks, if you are driving recklessly, bear in mind that if law enforcement is not watching, someone dear to you may be watching, and possibly for very costly outcomes. Last time, we started our discussion with Dr. Abraham Nwankwo, Director General of the Nigeria Debt Management Office, on debt management in Nigeria. We discussed debt relief and how Nigeria has been able to manage its debt. Now, please join me as we conclude our discussion with Dr. Nwankwo. Now, our debt burden in terms of dollars is in the $44-45 billion area. Before we got the debt relief, we were sort of in that neighborhood. Yeah. You know, an average person watching now, should they be worried, or are we just looking at the size of the GDP as changing and therefore it's okay? Well, should we not be worried that the debt amount is very close to where we were before we said we were really in trouble?
Very, very relevant observation. As you know, before we started exiting the Paris Club Day 2005 onwards, December 2004, our total public debt, external and domestic, was about $46 billion. Currently, our total public debt, domestic and external, is about $45 billion. So somebody will say,
so are we in trouble?
Are we going back to where we are? Yes. No, but the answer is no. We have not gone back.
Okay.
At that time, when our total public debt was about $46 billion, our GDP was about $85 billion, and our total debt GDP ratio was about 54%. Now, where we have a total public debt of about $45 billion, our GDP is about $238 billion. You can see the big difference.
Yeah. So
our debt is 45.
We're a bigger boy now compared
our
to
debt is 45.
when we were
Our
little kid.
GDP is 238.
Yeah.
Then our debt was 46. Our GDP was only 85. The Nigerian economy, as you know, over the past 7 years, in terms of both nominal and real growth rates, has been among the best performance in the world. That is a fact that nobody can deny. It is a record.
But there are people that are saying that is one of the best on paper.
Now let's look.
But in terms of actual activity, let's say with employment, with living condition, can we say the same? That's that kind of question.
The question you would ask is that if our economy in real terms was not growing as fast as it has been growing over the past 5 years,
yes.
if we have been experiencing real declines, as some parts of the world have been declining.
Maybe not decline, but not growing quite as fast.
Yeah, but what would it have looked like? Poverty would have been much worse. So the truth is that we have to look at this in the context of what's happening globally. Okay. Over the past 10 years, the past 1 decade, it has been a traumatic time for the whole global economy. Remember, for example, that between 2007 and 2010, most parts of the world, particularly the so-called industrialized countries, have experienced some serious declines. More poverty, decline in their growth rates, and more poverty and all that. So we would not expect that we would have been completely isolated. But indeed, the economies of Africa and other emerging economies, including Nigeria, have managed not to have suffered fully the impact of the global decline for 1 or 2 reasons. Yes. And one of the most important reasons for that
was for us, the reason is that we have oil.
No, one of the most important reasons for that, globally speaking, even in the case of Nigeria, is that because the debt crisis we faced 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and emerged from in the early 2000s, set us on a path of reform, as it were, in a path of reform and penance and repentance, economically speaking. And so we are having already a momentum of reform, of transformation, by the time the global crisis came. And so because we're already on the path of reform, create appropriate instrument outlets for the development of long-term funds from the pension sector, from the insurance sector.
It is absolutely clear, Dr. Nwankwo, that we need a DMO in Nigeria. And I also want to put on record, I know you're doing a wonderful job in a very difficult field. Now, I want you to say to us, what as the Director General of DMO, the Debt Management Office here in Nigeria, what general information or message do you have for the ordinary person out there, the guy not sophisticated in markets and whatever? How do they understand what you do in your office and how that impacts the average person on the street?
No,
because our show, the aim of our show is to show how whatever it is that we're doing helps to raise the level of living for the average person.
Now, very simple way I'll put it. Yes. Everywhere in the world, governments expect some relatively regular flow of income, revenue. But the revenue inflow for a given period of time is never enough to carry out critical long-term projects, build roads for the people, build schools for them, supply water. So the way government does about it, and that's the central job of a public debt management office, is that if the government knows that it's going to be generating revenues, surpluses of 20 billion per annum for the next 5 years, which means in 5 years it expects to generate 100 billion. And it needs 100 billion to build a rural feeder road. Then, from the public debt management point of view, what government should and does do is to go ahead now and borrow 100 billion to provide that rural feeder road today, so that it can use the streams of revenue it's expected over the next 5 years to pay back, as against waiting for the next 5 years to accumulate and then start. Now, you can see that in doing so, government is fast-tracking development and fast-tracking the bringing near to the people a higher standard of living. Yeah. That is a simple way I want to demonstrate to the ordinary person on the street the relevance of public debt management. The other issues we do are all amplifications and complications of this hypothesis. But the whole idea is that the government should be able to say, look, since we expect over the next 10 years to have so much money regularly from taxation, and why don't we go ahead to that, borrow that money and provide the service to the people today, build the school today, so that our children will have education today, because by the next 10 years, some of them will have grown so old. So that is the approach. That's the essence.
Because of the fact that we have shifted from external borrowing, it seems clearly that way if you look at the numbers, to more domestic borrowing, because understanding you're developing the market and all that. Does that have any impact on imports and exports? For example, does that not promote Nigerians importing more than they're able to export? This is the way I'm looking at that. Now, if, let's say, so far, even you have said that we're going to pull back a little bit in order to open space for the private sector, which assumes that means the space is getting a little bit congested for the private sector, which also assumes that, well, presupposes that the private sector is probably not producing as much, say, exportables as they could be producing right now, but yet have the resources to be able to import stuff from outside. So is this not skewing things to where now we are probably importing a little bit more than we would have imported and not able to export as much as we would have exported, given the shift to more domestic borrowing versus external borrowing?
No, again, I would say no.
Okay.
Why it is no is this. I try to make us understand that there was a vacuum. You see, we are looking at it as if, there was a market where the private sector could have gone to access long-term funds.
But there was not.
Government crowded them out.
Yes.
The market did not exist. The government started creating that market in 2003. So it could not have crowded out something that did not exist. Rather, the government took initiative to create this market. It is not that it has been created that we can talk about who is now using it and in what proportion. And it's at this stage that the government has also taken that strategic decision that now we have developed the market that did not exist. We now have 20-year money in the market. The private sector can now issue their own bonds, 5-year, 7, 10-year, or 20-year bonds to raise long-term money to fund agriculture, manufacturing, power, infrastructure, etc., etc. Now, government is taking that very strategic decision to start a tactical withdrawal from borrowing from the domestic market to create more space.
Let's say that you have a revenue of, say, 100 naira. But the thing that you want to spend requires an expenditure of 120 naira. So you need to finance that gap with 20 naira. Now, when you get that 20 naira, is it possible that we say that this particular thing is the thing that we're using this 20 naira for? Because there are people who ask that kind of question out there in the general public. They say, if they can be sure that 20 naira that you just borrowed is to do this road, but not mingled with the rest of the money. So when the time comes, you say we need to repay, but we don't even know whether you use the money for the thing that you had wanted to use the money for.
That's the issue of accountability. And that observation is valid. Much of the new borrowings to be done, whether domestic or externally, should be tied to specific projects.
That's the point,
That's the direction government is doing. So that as much as possible, we do not talk of simply funding the budget for borrowed money for specific projects.
Because people would say, why don't you borrow money to provide electricity?
That's what I'm saying. But that's what is happening now.
Big time, because it's just, why didn't we know this all this time?
Well, anytime you wake up from your sleep, it's your morning.
On that note, I want to thank you so very much, Dr. Nwankwo.
God bless.
That's been wonderful.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
For the opportunity.
In my view, the last time, I noted that for debt reduction to have a tangible impact on poverty, any additional money realized would have to be spent on programs like education, health, and sanitation in order to have direct benefits for the poor, who, especially in developing countries, need to be brought into the mainstream economy to broaden economic participation and enrich development. So far, the results are not encouraging in this regard, especially when we use the attainment of the Millennium Development Goals as indicators. However, it appears debt relief provided the opportunity to reshape macroeconomic strategies, as economic growth in many sub-Saharan African countries actually climbed well over 5% in average results from 2001 to 2011. Indeed, except for 2009, when the effects of the 2008 to 2009 global economic crisis became pronounced, real GDP growth has stayed above 5% since 2004 for Africa as a whole. Now, since the things that set off the debt crisis have not gone away, what is Africa going to do to avoid another round of serious debt problems? The thing to do is to diversify our economies away from just the export of raw materials that often include only mineral resources and agricultural products. Let us be clear, a policy of overemphasis on agriculture in the hope of raising revenue is also faulty. We must diversify our economies and be ready to engage the world in the overlapping demand of all goods, including industrial goods. After all, if you want to be competitive, you'll have to do what other people are doing who are competitive. Folks, our competitors outside Africa are becoming very industrialized and are producing high-tech goods and world-class services. If Africa sells only agricultural products, raw or processed, the terms of trade may never be sustainably positive to enable us purchase the imports we need to adequately run our economies. Agricultural products bring jobs, incomes, and revenue, of course, but not as much as consumer electronics, cars, military tanks, tractors, and airplanes, which we must buy. It is not wrong to borrow, but if you have to borrow, you better be borrowing in order to build the skill sets, infrastructure, and productive capacity needed to prevent excessive borrowing in the future. Excessive borrowing, especially domestically, can strangle the private sector and set off a vicious circle of economic weakness, unemployment, and poverty. It is good for the government to develop our capital markets and participate in them, but it is very important to have only a modest presence such that interest rates are not driven up to choke the market. For developing countries, and especially in Africa, we must ensure that our debt management and capital markets are primed to ensure rapid rises in private sector productivity, economic growth, and economic development. I'm Magnus Packle, and that's my view.